Daniel. We are in chapter 4. Hope everybody got a lesson called Nebuchadnezzar's Nightmare. Nebuchadnezzar is definitely a dreamer, isn't he? God has talked to him before through a dream, and he's speaking again. And this dream, again, will be something bewildering to Nebuchadnezzar. And a notable difference I found was that instead of making his wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the others, instead of making them tell him what the dream was, he goes ahead and tells them what the dream is. But they could still not interpret it. Daniel is summoned. He tells Daniel what the dream is. And it has some pretty alarming details in it, doesn't it? We'll read that in just a moment. But what chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's account. Daniel, I'm sure, is penning this, but this is from Nebuchadnezzar's own words. And it makes me think that this is a letter, or at least a written document of some sort, that's put into the annals of the Babylonian historical, record-keeping stuff. It's a chronicle. That's what Chronicles is about. It's the annals of the kings of Israel and Judah. And here we have one that could have been a submitted entry for Babylonian history. So this is from Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Now, there's something interesting that happens in Scripture whenever we have a foreign, and I'm not necessarily just saying foreign by the fact that he wasn't Jew or he wasn't Israelite, he was Babylonian. I'm talking about outside of those that God tapped to be inspired to give us the canon of Scripture. You have to be careful whenever you're reading a part of the text that doesn't come from a divinely inspired person. Now, it is my belief, this is just an interesting thing I wanted to make sure I covered. It is my belief, because I believe in God having a hand in the canonicity of the Scripture, if you know what that means, that it's preserved for us in the divinely inspired Word of God. But we, by the same token, it's here for our learning, obviously. But by the same token, we have to understand theology may or may not be based on what Nebuchadnezzar is documenting. Let me give you another example of this. I don't know really of another example that's as extensive as this one, except maybe the book of Job. In the book of Job, you have the various friends that come to Job's uninvited advice-giving group. You know what I mean? It's like they want to go do an intervention with Job, but they're not really helping. But some of the chapters in Job are the complete discourse from one or two or the third friend. We know that already in Job we have his wife saying, "Curse God and die." And we know that that's not good advice, right? So you have to make sure you get this contextualized. Does this make sense to anybody? Everything about chapter 4, everything that I can see, even though there's a part of chapter 4 that really looks like, okay, here I am, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm telling you all this, but then he kind of steps out and says, now, then Nebuchadnezzar did this and this, and then it comes back into first person again, but there's no quotation change, and you don't see that in the Hebrew. In other words, you don't see necessarily where it is Nebuchadnezzar, then somebody outside like Daniel, who's writing a little bit of the part in between, and it goes back to Nebuchadnezzar. It's almost as if this whole thing is Nebuchadnezzar, but like the Apostle Paul, he speaks of himself in a third person. Remember when Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, "I knew a man 14 years ago that was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body." That's a weird passage, isn't it? He's talking about himself. He makes that evident later on. Why does he start off that way? I don't know. It's always bewildering to me. So I'm saying all of that to say, remember, I think for tonight's lesson, anything we see has to be contextualized. In other words, it is Nebuchadnezzar through at least the majority of this chapter, at least at the beginning and at the end. Okay, so here's the observations we make, and we'll do some reading. It seems as if Nebuchadnezzar is writing a letter, and it is addressed to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth. Who did he leave out? No one. He wants the whole world to know, right? And he wishes upon its readers of this supposed letter prosperity. Verse 1, he says, why am I in Jonah? Because I'm preaching Jonah Sunday morning. I'm going to continue. Did I say Jonah a while ago? Open to Daniel, please. Sorry about that. I'm also doing a sermon on Jonah. I'm going to continue Jonah, by the way, in a new series for this month. Okay. Ezekiel, Daniel. Okay, Daniel. Sorry. Sorry about that. Daniel 4. I'll get there in a second. So he says, may you prosper greatly. That's the point I want to say at the end of verse 1. He says that it is his pleasure to tell about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for him. Let's read verse 3. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. It's pretty profound. Coming from somebody who's polytheistic, you know. Then he starts by saying that one day he's at his home, in his palace, and contented and prosperous. He had a dream that made him afraid and said that the images and the visions that passed through his mind did what to him? Terrified him. He commands all the wise men to come to his aid to interpret the dream. He even told them what the dream was about, different from the first go-around from chapter 2, right? They couldn't interpret the dream. Now remember in chapter 2 they said if you give us what the dream was, then we can interpret it. But they can't do it here after he told them what it was. And Daniel comes and he tells Daniel the dream. And the dream went like this. This starts in verse 10. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. Now I want to stop there and just mention one little fact about Babylon. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Y'all remember that? And also, just to kind of correlate this to the image he had erected that he wanted the 3 Hebrew children to bow down to was 90 foot tall, 9 feet wide, made of gold. And he wants his splendor known. Already, you and I, who don't have the ability to interpret dreams like Daniel does, probably could figure out this sounds like an analogy to Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon, doesn't it? And of course we know that it is because Daniel says so. But you see the correlation already. It grows. Already we knew from the vision that he had earlier. The head of gold, the breast and then the thighs and the feet and the legs, that those were succeeding kingdoms. And what he was told in that interpretation is that these would be kingdoms inferior to his. So this tree's description matches Babylon's glory and dominion. Okay? So we've got the dream going. Where did I leave off at? 13, thank you. In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, "Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches." I'm just giving you the voice I would imagine if it was a movie, right? It could be, "But let the stump in its..." No, it wouldn't be that way. "But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground and the grass of the field." The tree's going to be cut, but you're going to see remnant of the tree left behind, aren't you? A stump's left behind. "And then let him be drenched with the dew of heaven." What have we just done? We have now seen a revealing of the personification of a tree. The tree's cut down, and it says, "let him." Now it's talking about a person, isn't it? "Be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal." I think I've seen that a time or two on my school bus, but I don't know for sure. "Till 7, have you, Kim, seen that in the hallways at school? Yeah, I'm referring to teachers, by the way. "Till 7 times pass by for him." And it's a pretty, everybody concurs, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about all the scholars across all the different flavors of religion kind of come to an agreement that a time in Bible is reference to a year. That's a year. There's a reference, for example, in Revelation, that there'll be a time, times, and half a time. And that's taken as 1 year, 2 years, and then half a year for 3.5 years, which also correlates to, was it 42 months, or what was the other reference? So many days, 1,200 something days. Anyway, that all relates to, the math all computes there that it's a 3.5 year span. This is for 7 years, in other words, till 7 times pass by for him. We're still in the dream. So verse 17, "The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets them over them, the lowliest of people." Now let me stop here and come back to something. This is what Nebuchadnezzar is telling Daniel, and eventually to the whole world in the letter. Daniel's take on this is that these are true words, isn't it? Which then affirms the validity and reliability of what Nebuchadnezzar is saying. So when I go back and say he's not maybe an inspired writer, or maybe he is, that's another thing we might want to explore there, but I don't want to get too bogged down in details about that. But he is making points that are valid and are absolutely true about our God. Wouldn't you agree? And I think everything he says up to this point is valid about God. But there's something coming up I want to caution you on. Okay, so that's the dream. After telling the dream, he had hopes that Daniel, who, according to him, Nebuchadnezzar, had the spirit of the holy gods in him. Now, that's definitely coming from Nebuchadnezzar, right? And that he could tell him the meaning. Daniel's reaction to the dream was both perplexing and terrifying. Apparently, Nebuchadnezzar picked up on that. Don't let this alarm you, Daniel. And Daniel's response is in verse 19 toward the end, where the new paragraph starts. Belteshazzar, which is his Babylonian name, but it's Daniel, answered, "My Lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the wild animals, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. Your Majesty saw a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven and saying, 'Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field. While its roots remain in the ground, let them be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let them live with the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him.' This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree that the Most High has issued against my Lord the King. You know, the tree, you will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules." After giving that interpretation, Daniel gave the advice to Nebuchadnezzar that he should renounce his sins by doing what was right. 1 year later, 12 months. And by the way, I want to come back to something too. Forget about this. Daniel is perplexed about this dream for a while, for a time. It says in verse 19, this is where Nebuchadnezzar picks up on something's bothering you. You'd have to think that what Nebuchadnezzar told him, and also what he just repeated, and now what he has interpreted for Nebuchadnezzar, there's probably more than one reason why he's delayed in telling Nebuchadnezzar, because first of all, he's perplexed during this time, but also it's got to sink in. Sometimes you get bad news and you know you got to share it with somebody else that it might relate to, and you sit on it for a little bit thinking, how am I going to do that? Is that true? I mean, there are times that we get in, and maybe sometimes it doesn't process even for us. It might seem surreal. We may go through those stages of, this can't be true. There's a denial, or there's, is this real? Is this just a dream? How many of you have ever thought, you wish this was just a dream and I hope to wake up from this? I mean, I've heard people talk about that a lot. So there's a little delay there, a little stall time there in letting this sink in. I think it really does affect Daniel. 1 year later, 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar is walking on his roof. I wonder how many times in the Bible kings get in trouble when they're on the rooftop of the palace. That could be a top 10 list. I know of 2 that would make the top 10 list right there, David being the other. And he's declaring while he's up there, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" And while the words were still on his lips, a voice come down from heaven, verse 31, "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes." I don't know why I think angels are monotone, but it just sounds more authoritative that way, I guess. Scott, this could be a mic drop moment too. I mean, very much like whoever it was that had brought up about, I think Don maybe, or Peter's denial and then the rooster crows. Was that you? That was you, Pam? And that's just a matter of hours between when Jesus said that's what's going to happen and then the rooster crows and it goes, oh my. This is a year later. Do you think he remembers these words once the messenger starts speaking them? Oh boy. I messed up, didn't I? I'm thinking he probably can remember. These are vivid descriptions of a dream that were troubling to him enough so he took the time to get Daniel. This ain't a dream he's forgotten. He's forgotten the lesson from it. It's apparent that he didn't follow Daniel's advice to renounce his sins and, try to avoid this calamity. What were you saying? He does, doesn't he? He forgets a lot. Are we like him? Let's see, did I finish what the guy said? 32. You will be driven away from people. I think so. Or most of it. So 7 times will pass by, and then you'll acknowledge him. That God's most high, and he gives kingdoms, earth, anyone he wishes. Okay, everything from the voice came true when? Immediately. And so we've had it said once from Nebuchadnezzar, then Daniel repeats it. Now this guy says it 3 times. We know what's happening to him. He's driven away, living like a wild animal. Your hair's going to be growing like eagle feathers. You're going to be drenched by the dew. You're nothing worse than being out in the remote places being cold and wet. Hypothermia can set in. That's one of the things when you go out in the wilderness trekking in the back country, when that sun starts going down, and even earlier in the woods when you have the canopy of trees, you need to start thinking about where you're going to spend the night, and there's no Hampton Inn there. So one of 2 things are on the priority list, at least 2 things: shelter and maybe fire, and then food can come a little bit later, but you're going to have some warmth and you need shelter. This all happens immediately. At the end of the time, 7 years, I just want you to know that while the verse doesn't give you maybe time here to think about what's going on in the 7 years, that's a long time. Is it not? Lots happen. If you lost out 7 years of your life at any point of your life, how shocked would you be when you come back to the real world and get integrated, acclimated back into society? Different presidents, different systems, maybe even a different ruling authority, different tax rates, different, why'd I have to bring that up? Different, all kinds of things are different. You paid what for gas 7 years ago? Of course, they're driving chariots, I know, but you see the correlation. Did you ever, I hear of these stories, and I see movies and TV shows where somebody has amnesia, and they've checked out for a few years, but then they come back. And it's a shock. Does anybody know that that's happened to anybody in real life? Do you know anybody personally that that's happened to? That would be bizarre. You got to tell them about, what do you tell them about, Scott? What's come into play in the last 7 years? Okay, yeah. I mean, it said he had claws like birds. Yeah. I'm thinking of that book I had as a kid, the Guinness Book of World Records, and that guy had the longest nails, and they curled everywhere, and I guess his toenails too. I don't know. I had an uncle once that I thought had a record for nails, but I'm not going to go into that. What do you think? What's come into play in the last 7 years? If you had some reason last 7 years ago had amnesia, then all of a sudden you came to, what is it we're going to all have to tell you about? There's a lot in there. It's interesting. You're going to have to tell them about COVID, I guess. Why is everybody wearing masks? Or my my grandma was a woman. Now she is non-binary. What does that mean? I don't know. Huh? Make no assumptions. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of use a little imagination right there, because I didn't want us just to read over 7 times a pass and then now he does this. I want you to think about the 7 years. I want you to really think about that, because that had to have been a state of, well, as a matter of fact, when he does say that then I raised my eyes toward heaven and my sanity was restored to me, that what he was enduring for 7 years was insane. Yeah? Or he's in turmoil but doesn't know what to do about it. It's kind of reminding me of probably the state of affairs that the one with the legion of demons in Mark 5 is in. Being in constant torment or being constant destitute, cutting himself with stones, repeatedly. What does he live on? He's like a wild beast with no human contact, by the way. He is driven away from people, it says, for 7 years. He is in solitary confinement. Maybe not confined to a cell, but there's other cells come in all shapes and sizes. So it's interesting to think about. But he does raise his eyes toward heaven, and his sanity is restored. Then he declares the following, verse 34. The break where the new paragraph begins. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" In other words, you and I don't get to question God about, what do you think you're doing and why are you doing this? And God knows better than us. When his sanity was restored, so was his splendor and honor. And at that time, his own advisors and nobles sought him out. And he was restored to his throne, becoming even greater than before. He ends this letter with verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. It sounds like he owns his mistake. Does it to you? I shouldn't have said that day on the roof, look at what I've done by my own strength, my own initiative, my own means, my own resources, my own gifts, my own talents, that I should have known. I am what I am where I am because God made me what I am and where I am. Amen? That's true of any of us. Mm-hmm. And I like this part where it says at the same time that when this time had expired, that his advisors start looking for him. Did they get word? Was there a message sent out? Or did they all of a sudden have this urge to, let's go looking for Nebuchadnezzar? It's been 7 years. Was it a part of God maneuvering that back together? Then it's almost like they're a part of him being restored to that throne. It's a part of that story. It's a package deal. And let me ask you this. Would everybody have the same reaction Nebuchadnezzar had if you had 7 years of pure HE double hockey sticks? You know what I mean? Would everybody have that reaction? I know some of you have heard this. If you want to know the loyalty of your dog versus the loyalty of your wife, lock them both up in the trunk for a day, and when you open it up, see who's happy to see you. I think it's a dog and cat story, but wife sounds so much better in that story for some reason. The dog is going to be happy to see you. She's not in here. Yeah, I know. But not everybody would have that take. Some people are going to come out of that situation, I'm never going back to church. I'm never going to, for whatever reason, some people are just going to be mad at God for the rest of their life. Huh? Yeah. What did I do to deserve this? And play the victim. I didn't deserve this. This is not fair. This is unjust. Well, it's just, but it may not be fair, regardless of how you look at it. God's still God. And you got to realize, by the way, could he have not sent him back in the wilderness for another 7 years or for the rest of his life to the same situation? Yeah. And that might have been the blessing of the deal rather than going back for another 7 years, I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't ask that on our discussion questions, but I did wonder about that, is what's going on in the kingdom during those 7 years. And we know that, in the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar's not on the scene. It's Belshazzar, his son, who's... Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does remind me of some movie and storylines. Robin Hood, I think. Isn't the king gone a while? And, the king that's acting is coming in and trying to presume the throne. I don't know what's going on in the kingdom. We're not really told. Go ahead. So they're going to bat for him. They're kind of, protecting him when he's in a state of affairs of not being in a condition to be seen in the public eye right now. Well, I tell you what, it does kind of make me think it's possible that the reason the advisor starts seeking him out is they may have been doing some reconnaissance. They may be, we found him. He still looks like he's got the claws of an eagle or hair like eagle feathers, but one day they notice a different. And okay, I think we ought to go get him now. Could be something like that too. We're just not told. We're not told. But let me ask you this before we get into discussion questions. If that had been all about you, are you ready to write a book about it and tell the whole world? It'd be kind of embarrassing. That's my first question, I guess, is why do you think Nebuchadnezzar would want to share such an embarrassing story about his own life to the whole world? Yeah. Yes, he has. Yes. And he does seem to have the mindset is I don't want anybody else to have to go through what I just went through. And so at my expense, I'm putting this out there to maybe prevent you guys, the guys that follow me in leadership. My son is going to follow me in leadership, or the influence that we have in the church today with our young people. We want to try, and as a parent, it's our hope, isn't it, that we take what we had gone through with our mistakes, all our warts and flaws and blemishes, in hopes that as we pass that on, that will help spare them of some hardship and heartbreak. And I know as a parent, and I'm proud of my kids, I don't want you to get this message wrong. I know there are times I've shared something personal to my own kids so that they would not have to experience it, and yet sometimes, for whatever it is I'm talking about, they may still go and experience for themselves. It's not necessarily that I've mitigated it 100%, where I've clearly, have been able to prevent that. But by my telling them that, they have the opportunity later to now understand why I was saying that, and now they experience I'm the same way. Mom and Dad would tell me some of the things they did, or, well, they really didn't say a whole lot. My mom's gone, isn't she? Anyway, there are times where I still did it anyway. Didn't y'all? Didn't y'all do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I hadn't maybe had shared personal stuff, it might not have any productive impact later on when they did go through that stuff, even though it didn't spare them. My two oldest boys are sitting up here in the booth. Let me just ask, did it help y'all at all? I mean, y'all are not perfect. I'm not perfect. But did it help y'all at all that I told any of my personal things in hopes that y'all would make different choices? Okay? So in the aftermath, even though it may not have kept them 100% holy all the time, it gave them a core to look at and say, well, I'm just like Dad, and I'm going to try to be better. I'm going to try my best to keep Andrew from doing it, right? Or, children that Landon will have once he finds a woman to marry, and I need help in that department. Go ahead, Sam. They get smarter and smarter, don't they? They really do. They really do. I'm in high school. I'm thinking my dad is, and I never really actually ever thought that, but I hear this. People thought their dad was, or that their parents were so out of it and ignorant and not in touch with the real world. Huh? Yeah. But yeah, there's nothing changed about Mom and Dad's cognitive wisdom and all that. It's just my realization of how true that they were becomes greater for me, and so they get smarter in my mind. Anything else on question 1, maybe? Question 2, after reviewing verse 4, what dangers do we need to be concerned about whenever we feel contented and prosperous? And by the way, let me ask this. Is it wrong to feel contented? Is it wrong to be prosperous? No. But there's kind of a warning label on that, isn't there? Yeah. There's a verse that Paul wrote, 1 Corinthians. I think it's chapter 10, verse 12. To him that thinks he's standing, he needs to take heed because he might fall. You need to take it with a grain of salt that I'm feeling good today. Tomorrow you may not feel good today. Don't take it for granted when you feel good. Appreciate it. Live in it. Bask in it that you feel good. But don't assume every day is going to be like that and that you're just invincible and can go skydiving now. Oh, yeah. And he goes all in to tear these down and build larger ones. And he doesn't live to see it. Ooh. Your bank might fall too. Yeah. I would have hated to have been living in the I guess it was the 30s, and to think that I had everything, all my ducks in a row, and I find out that I don't even have ducks. I don't have my pond anymore. Where'd the ducks go? Where's the pond? It's not there. That would have been bad times. Question 3. What is the major flaw in Nebuchadnezzar's theology whenever he's asking Daniel for help in interpreting the dream? And this is where whoever said it earlier, like he didn't listen or he didn't remember the first time, because he had come to the realization of an almighty singular God. Why didn't he go back to that and said, I know that your gods are giving you this power to do it, so do it again. I need to know this interpretation. That's major flaws. So here's why I want to bring this up. Because I kind of alluded to, could he have been divinely inspired by God himself? Well, he could have. But in that moment, he's not, because that's not true. And God wouldn't have him say that for us to take as that's the gospel truth, because that's not true. Because God's already telling us, I'm the only true God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. Right? And you've got the first commandment that's given with a reason. You shall have no other gods before me, for I am a jealous God. So, yeah. Yes. Question 4. What do we discover about Daniel's feelings toward Nebuchadnezzar from this story? Compassionate, okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That could be. That could be. Interesting thing that just now dawned on me. Take this with a grain of salt. This is pure. I'm not even saying this is conjecture, because I'm doubtful this is the way, but this is actually a possibility, even though it may not be plausible. Could it be that this delay, and we don't know how long this delay is, it just says for a time he's perplexed, is an explanation as to why he's not in the Daniel 3 story? It's the same. Because we were wondering about that. Where's he at? Nothing is said of Daniel not bowing down to the image or bowing down to the image. We know he wouldn't bow down to the image. That's only about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's interesting, isn't it? What else do we get from Daniel's feelings? What do you get? So we had, what do you say, Jerry, at first? Compassion, okay. Yeah. I mean, his statement is, oh, Neb, if this was only said of your enemies. It's like he did not want to tell Nebuchadnezzar this was going to be about him, as if this was breaking his heart. And I love that about Daniel, because it's the heart of a servant that wants the best for everybody. It's Jesus. When he looks over Jerusalem, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how many times have I wanted to gather all of you like a hen gathers her chicks, but you just weren't willing. And I think Daniel, because he is a prophet, and that doesn't necessarily always imply foretelling the future, he can probably see the handwriting on the wall, which is next chapter, by the way. He can probably tell that even though, well, this is what you should do, in the back of his mind he knows he's not going to do that. And what can we take from that? What can we learn from Daniel is what I mean on that, about how we should feel towards the people around us. Especially for, let's say, for example, is everybody that you work with or work for a Christian? All your clients Christians? You'd like to think they were, right? Customers that come into your store or wherever it is you're at, are they all Christians? No. But you come to know them and love them, and you meet with them during a process of a job or whatever. You get to know a little bit about their family. You know the name of their dog and the cat or whatever it is. You get some affinity with them. And when you hear of something bad or they're telling you about something, you're thinking, oh, in the back of your mind, that's not going to be good. You do kind of have concern for them, right? That's because you're human and you are being the kind of caring, compassionate person that God really wants us to be. You ought to be in tune to that. Question 5. According to Daniel, how was Nebuchadnezzar to renounce sin? Just to stand up and say, okay, I'm sorry, I'll change, I renounce sin. By action, wasn't it? You renounce sin by doing. It's not just saying, I'll change. How many people have said, I'll change, and they don't? How many people have thought others will change, and they don't? Well, I know they'll change after we get married. No, that don't happen. It don't happen, does it? You know, when I get to this point, I know I'll convince them of this. Or when I start to work, I know, or maybe you're the boss and you've got somebody you really want to help out, a friend who's got a niece or nephew, and you're trying to get they're trying to get a favor, and you're thinking, okay, well maybe I can change them, because you know deep down they're not really all that trustworthy, dependable, but maybe you can change them. You ever had that thought, Lee? Never? Question 6. Why would Nebuchadnezzar not be more on guard concerning the dangers revealed in this interpretation and more adamant about taking Daniel's advice to do what's right? Huh? And by the way, I don't think necessarily that Daniel gave a guarantee that if you renounce sins by doing what's right, you'll avoid this now. But you could hope for it. And there's a little story like that in the book of Acts where when Simon the sorcerer is asking to buy the gift to be able to pass on the miraculous gifts to others, like he saw the laying on of the apostles' hands. And which one of the apostles was it, Peter? Or said something like, you know, may your money perish with you, how foolish it was for you to think you could buy the gift of the Holy Spirit with money. And it says, you better repent now so that God will relinquish what he could do to you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a lot, but like, you need to get on your knees right now and ask God that he, that he doesn't strike you down for this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. And we do know that the promises of God, as well as sentences that are handed down by God, can be conditional. Right. So you do have the power to try to influence God. I mean, that's the one thing I really want you to realize about the power of prayer is God will sometimes do something because you prompted through prayer for him to do, and sometimes God won't do a thing because you failed to prompt him to do. Exactly what James says. You don't have because you didn't ask. But if you had asked, God would have done something there. Question 7. What should Christians today emulate from Nebuchadnezzar's example? Is that me or you? That's okay. Making noise. Should we all sit down and write letters to every nation, to the whole world, to every person? I mean, we should be open to the people around us saying, Hey, let me share with you that I'm not perfect. I went through some things in my life. Let me tell you what God did for me, though, because that's what he's doing. The first part of this chapter is Nebuchadnezzar saying, I'm about to tell you a story. Not just the first part till I got so high and mighty on that rooftop that day. The end, like the end result is this. But I've got to tell you the bad about it too so I can get to the end. But I want to share it to you. You need to know about what God can do. Isn't that evangelism? Isn't that what it means to be a witness? To give your testimony by your living, by your talking to people, I know we sometimes don't like the word testimony or witness. We think, well, that's a Baptist word or, denominational thing. It's a biblical thing to give your testimony. No, you're not an eyewitness, but you know what you've experienced that God's done for you in your life, don't you? I hope. And you can testify to others what he's done. That helps in reaching them. What should Christians today avoid from Nebuchadnezzar's example? Well, backsliding. Try to remember things, How about this one? No one should think more highly of himself than he should. How about that one? Romans 12. Are there other stories in the Bible like this one where a major leader acknowledges the power and the might of God? Did Pharaoh ever do that? At times, yeah. It's sporadic and did maybe, but did any other major leaders in the story of the king get any of that? I think we did. I think we get that from other kings in this book. It says read Philippians 2, 9, and 11 and discuss how it might relate to the story. Just quickly, this is the part of the Christian hymn that where every tongue will confess, every knee will bow. In other words, acknowledgement that is being mandated towards Nebuchadnezzar is going to happen by every single person, but it might be too late when it happens. Question 11. Is the acknowledgement that God exists, that He is all-powerful, enough for us to get to heaven? It's kind of a weird question. If you take the statement, acknowledgement of God, meaning that I will also trust and obey, then it could. But just by saying that there is a God and that He's powerful is no different than when James points out that even the demons believe and they tremble. And the last question, do you think it's possible that we'll see King Nebuchadnezzar in heaven? You ever thought about that? Ooh. Hi, Pew. Yeah. Is it possible that King Nebuchadnezzar might be in heaven? And as far as I know, that's the end to Nebuchadnezzar that we have, unless there's some references I'm not thinking of outside of Daniel. It ends on a good note for him. I'd like to think that 12 months from there that he doesn't forget anymore. You know what I mean? It's not a guarantee, but I think it's possible that you're going to get to see King Nebuchadnezzar. After all, Daniel does call for him to renounce his sins at the beginning, and later when he lifts his eyes toward heaven, you almost have to imply that he did, and God restored to him splendor and honor. That's not a guarantee that he had salvation in the bank there, but, it's the step in the right direction. We could say that, couldn't we? I hope he's in heaven. And I thought about this today thinking, I never considered that he, and maybe there's others we ought to consider. I wonder if they're in heaven. Especially when you get back in the Old Testament part and you're talking about whether or not they were baptized is irrelevant then. Did you have a question, Landon? Okay. True. How many of you grew up with the Joel Miller film strip lessons? If you know what I'm talking about, how the dispensations of time are divided into three categories. You had a patriarchal age, Mosaic age, Christian age. Have y'all heard of those references before? Have you ever heard that the patriarchal age did not end when the Mosaic age started, that it continued up till the Christ age? Have you ever heard that? That alongside Mosaic, there's still patriarchal principles for those not part of Israel, because the Ten Commandments are given to Israel. Have you ever thought about that? Yeah. In other words, I mean, what we see in the Old Testament, I know we're over time, but just for a second here, anybody who wanted to become a Jew would do so by proselyting. In other words, they would be ceremonially washed, which was a baptism, really, into Judaism. And we know that happened with Rahab, that she is in the Judaistic history. And there's a few others that are like that. Ruth, the Moabitess, you know. So we have examples of that, all right. Could there be Babylonians? Could there be Assyrians? Romans? You know, pretty cool to think about. All right, we'll stop with that. We're going to be handwriting on the wall next week, so I hope to see the handwriting on the wall. Tell me what it means.